We're reacting to things that happened yesterday in week 12 of this college football season. So Georgia beat Tennessee 31 to 17 yesterday, which is really no surprise. I was like 95% sure that Georgia would win that game. Tennessee isn't going to do anything big this year except for maybe get a playoff spot because it's a 12-team playoff and lose. Tennessee's offensive struggles against Georgia continued yesterday. They only scored 17 points, which is not very much, and really they only scored 14 offensive points because that field goal drive. They got the football in field goal range and couldn't get a first down. And Tennessee has a problem because their quarterback, Nico, I'm about to leave you, can't throw the deep ball. And they barely even tried to throw the deep ball yesterday, but the few times that they did try, I could see why they weren't trying it very much. Because he was so inaccurate that his receivers didn't have a chance to catch any of those deep balls. But Georgia's uh, best linebacker, Smile Munden, is now healthy, and he had a big game yesterday with 8 tackles and a sack. And Georgia's tight end, Oscar Delp, finally started to look kind of like Brock Bowers did. He was a very highly recruited player, and it was expected to be the next great tight end for them. And yesterday, he had 4 catches for 56 yards and 2 touchdowns. But before yesterday, this season, he had been a complete bust. The 9 games before the Tennessee game, he had a total of 9 catches. And it's not like some other tight end had taken on Brock Bowers' role. Instead, their other tight ends had about the same amount of production that he had. And Carlton Beck finally didn't turn the ball over yesterday. He actually played really well, throwing for 347 yards. He ate up Tennessee's secondary really badly, which he would do to pretty much every secondary last season. And Georgia is probably going to go to the college football playoff, even though they have lost to Alabama and Ole Miss, who are very likely going to have the same record as them. Georgia's last 2 games being Massachusetts and Georgia Tech, they're going to win those and finish it 10-2. And the Ole Miss is likely going to go to the conference championship game and play against either Texas or Texas A&M, the winner of that game. Because Texas does still have to beat Kentucky next week, and Texas A&M does still have to beat Auburn next week, but they're very likely going to win those games. And Ole Miss has beaten Georgia, and they've not played Alabama or Tennessee. And Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee right now are all tied, and Alabama and Tennessee are also going to very likely finish at 10-2, and Ole Miss and Alabama, is beating Georgia, and Tennessee is beating Alabama, and Georgia's beating Tennessee. So that's why Ole Miss, having beaten Georgia, would have to go to the SEC championship. And if Texas loses the game against Texas A&M, they won't go to the SEC championship. Then they'll be the same as Ole Miss, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee, and they wouldn't have played Ole Miss or Alabama or Tennessee, but they played Georgia and lost. And Texas A&M, if they lose to Texas, they wouldn't have a chance to have a rematch against Texas in the SEC championship because even though they'll have the same conference record as Ole Miss, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee, they'll have a worse overall record, and that will mean that they are ranked lower than those other four teams. And they haven't played any of Ole Miss, Alabama, Georgia, or Tennessee. But Tennessee's defensive line, I had thought was about as good as Ole Miss's defensive line, but it sure doesn't seem to be because Ole Miss's defensive line was pushing Georgia's offensive line around like they were nothing. But Georgia's offensive line actually won the battle with Tennessee's defensive line. Ole Miss sacked Carson Beck 5 times, and Tennessee sacked Carson Beck 0 times. And Texas did not look elite yesterday. I watched them play against the Woo Pig Sooie dummies, and they had a hard time putting them away, only winning 20-10. Now, defensively, they played great, but offensively, they played uh, terrible. And Florida upset LSU, and you know how bad it has to be to lose to Sunbelt Billy Napier pretty bad, and it's also even more bad to lose to him by 2 scores like LSU did. Florida might actually make a bowl game this year because Ole Miss, their next game will very likely be a loss, and they're 5-5 right now, and they'll have a good chance though to win their last game, it being against Florida State, who's even worse than they are. But if they make a bowl game, they would have beaten expectations. And a program is in pretty bad shape if they've beaten expectations just by making a bowl game. But LSU's offense is nothing like it was last year, and their defense really isn't that good either. But I know they did beat Ole Miss, and that's all they'll be able to say they did this season. That was their Super Bowl. But Ole Miss is going to be busy trying to win a national championship, while LSU is going to be busy getting ready for a bowl game that they won't even want to play in, and half their players will probably sit out for. But BYU got upset by Kansas last night, 17 to 13. And Kansas this year has looked a lot more like the Kansas teams of the past and not like the Kansas team last year. So that was kind of a pretty big upset. But really, I'm not too surprised by it because BYU, even though they had a much better record than Kansas did, as many close games as they've had, even though they're a lot better than they were supposed to be, some of it I do think is luck. And Arizona State beat Kansas State, so Kansas State is now out of being able to go to the Big 12 championship. But Arizona State does have a chance to go because they only have 2 losses, and now that BYU has a loss, they're going to play BYU next week, and they get them at home. So I think they'll have a good chance to win that game, and if they do, that'll put them ahead of BYU. And Colorado is possibly even going to win the Big 12 this year, something that I thought there was zero chance of before the season began. And you know how bad a conference has to be for Colorado to be the champion of it? Pretty bad. Now, I know Colorado's won a lot of games this year, but I'm telling you, as soon as they play a really good team, they will get blown out. And Colorado is still not for sure in the conference championship because they're going to play Kansas next week, and there's a decent chance that they could lose that game. But Oregon had trouble yesterday. They did get the win over Wisconsin, 16-13, but it went down almost till the end. And Jordan James, their best running back, who was questionable, actually played in that game. I would have thought that they could have won by at least 10 more points than they did, but they're still going to be number one in the country, no doubt, because they have the win over Ohio State. But that will be it with this video. Please subscribe and thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.